If you're unaware, Onyx Path Publishing created the Storypath system that is a spiritual successor to the storyteller system that's used by Chronicles of Darkness and World of Darkness. The newest version of Storypath is called Storypath Ultra. They put out a preview on DriveThruRPG, and they are currently kickstarting their World Below game on BackerKit. Both will be linked below if you want to check them out. Note, because this is a preview, all of this is subject to change. The system is very similar to Chronicles of Darkness. You add your skill and attribute values, and then roll a number of 10-sided dice equal to that value. Any result that is equal to or higher than your target number, which defaults at 8, counts as a hit. If you roll 10, it counts as 2 hits. So long as you roll 1 success, then you can add your enhancement bonus to the roll as extra hits. You spend your hits to reduce the difficulty value of the roll. When it reaches 0, you succeed. If the roll has a complication value associated with it, you have to spend your additional hits in order to lower that value to 0 and remove the complication. If you don't, you succeed, but with a consequence involved. Additional hits can be spent on tricks to add additional effects, such as the knockdown and critical tricks. If a player fails a roll, the complication doesn't happen, and they generate a resource known as momentum for their team. However, if they wish to go further, they can accept the complication with the failure in order to gain 2 momentum instead. Momentum is a shared resource amongst the players that starts at 1 momentum per player. It builds up every time there's a failure or disaster, and it can be used at a 1-to-1 ratio to add enhancements to an action. You can spend 2 to change a failure into a success or a success with consequence if there was a complication. You can spend 1 to change a story element of a scene so long as the story guide approves. You can also spend it to gain 1 piece of evidence for an investigation without rolling. Now, They Came From also uses momentum for rewrites and cinematics, but I won't be going into that in detail here. If one of your abilities grants you advantage per a specific action type or attribute, you compare your advantage against your opponent's advantage. Each point of advantage over your opponent grants you a +2 enhancement on rolls and a +1 on difficulty if your advantage is higher. The same goes for your opponents as well if their advantage is higher. The default advantage is 1. At 3 or more, you don't need to roll, and the action is assumed to auto-succeed for the person who has the higher advantage. At character creation, you start with 1 major and 2 minor paths. These are background material that describe your character, however, they also have mechanical benefits. With your major path, you are granted a number of attributes at a higher value than your minor ones, as well as a special ability. Paths also grant you points in your skills. However, right now, there aren't that many paths available, just 1 for the brochure. However, when the World Below comes out, there will definitely be more. When you join a path, you can also have a connection to another player, which is called a bond. Bonds are an additional connection between characters. Bonds grant a +2 enhancement to teamwork actions if it's a positive bond, and actions against each other if it's a negative bond, so a mentor or a mentee, and a bunch of nemeses. There are 3 modes of play. For action adventure, which is essentially combat and a few other things, when you roll initiative, the person that rolls the most hits on their initiative roll gets to go first, and then selects who goes next, and then that person gets to select who goes after them, and so on and so forth until you get to the last person or story guide. And then that person can choose to either start the next round as the first person, or choose someone else to go. Injury boxes are how much damage you can take before falling unconscious or being taken out. There are 3 levels of them, which I'm going to post somewhere up here above my head, and as you get more damage, you gain a dice bonus to your rolls that is dependent on which level of injury you're at. Armor grants an extra injury box or 2 depending on its level, and soft armor is an enhancement to defense rolls against attacks. Defense is a static number of 1. However, if you wish, you can roll one of your resilience attributes, such as composure, resolve, and stamina, in order to add the hits to your defense total. So if you have a dice pool of 3 and you roll, get 1 hit, you add 1 to your defensive one for 2. Investigation has two components that I'll talk about: leads and evidence. Leads are key information that progresses the plot and usually require no roll to uncover it. Just being in the right situation allows you to discover it, but it may have a skill requirement to find it. So for instance, if it's something medically related, maybe you need to have at least 1 dot of medical to know what it is. Then there's evidence, which acts as an enhancement to all roles relevant to the investigation, as well as uncovering the truth behind the investigation. Lastly, we have the influence mode, which is essentially the social encounter mechanic. It's very similar to combat, actually. The influence action is a dice roll versus the target's integrity, which is essentially a social defense of 1, which can be used to resist the influence action. However, if the resist fails, the target can still refuse by either granting a narrative cost or by giving the influencer +2 enhancement to their next action against the target. Or if it's the players, they can add +2 momentum to the pool if they are the influencer and can't be granted what they want. Attitudes are how characters feel about your character. For instance, if you try to influence a character who has a positive attitude towards you, you get +1 advantage to social influence rolls against the defending character. However, if they have a negative attitude to you, they get a +1 social advantage on integrity actions against you. If there is a neutral attitude, nothing happens. It is no effect. If you're interested in how Storypath Ultra's combat is going to play out, check out this video over here about how Storypath combat currently works. It's most likely going to be the same as Storypath Ultra, though, again, subject to change. Shout out to our patrons for supporting the channel.